What if I told you that the absolute, undeniable cure for our failing education system was actually discovered way back in 1984?
Yeah, it sounds crazy, but it's true.
Right. And we aren't talking about some abstract theory or just a mild improvement. We are talking about a scientifically proven, rigorously tested method that literally took completely average, middle-of-the-pack students and just instantly propelled them into the top 2% of all learners.
The absolute top tier.
Exactly. It was the holy grail of education. But instead of deploying it everywhere, the educational establishment basically locked it in a drawer and walked away.
Well, they had to, right? Because actually utilizing it would have cost something like $3.7 trillion a year.
Which is just an unfathomable number. Welcome to our deep dive. I want you listening to this right now to just take a second and think back to your own education.
Or if you have kids, look at the school your children attend every single morning.
Right. Think about that. How much of the quality of that experience, the teachers, the technology, the safety, all of the opportunities, was dictated entirely by the ZIP code you just happen to live in?
It's a really uncomfortable question.
It is, but it is the foundation of our entire mission today. We are unpacking a radical, incredibly data-heavy policy document today. It's titled The Educational Commons, and it was written by an independent researcher named Zachary David Enfield.
And this deep dive is going to explore how that fundamental inequality, that ZIP code lottery,
Yeah.
might actually be completely dissolved within the next 20 years.
Okay, let's unpack this because the core premise here is just staggering to me. What if the traditional school system isn't just struggling to keep up, but is actually structurally obsolete?
Yeah, and we should definitely prepare the listener for the unique nature of this source material.
Mm.
Because the Educational Commons is, well, it's a fascinating text because it defies easy categorization,
It really does. It's all over the place in the best way.
Right. Like, it begins as a rigorous, strictly secular policy analysis. It is absolutely packed to the brim with randomized controlled trials, federal budget deficits, labor statistics, and capability benchmarks for artificial intelligence.
But then it takes a massive turn.
Exactly. Structurally, it takes all of that hard data and builds toward this mind-bending theological conclusion about the end of human-to-human teaching as we know it.
And what if the replacement isn't some dystopian, cold robot taking over a classroom? What if it's a profoundly democratizing and maybe even prophesied leveling of the playing field?
That's the core argument he makes. But to understand where Enfield argues we are going, we first have to really thoroughly dismantle the baseline reality of the American education system today.
Right, we have to look at what's broken before we can fix it.
Exactly. He argues that the old model was built from the ground up on one foundational flaw, which is district purchasing power. He refers to the current state of ZIP code-based education as a purchasing lottery.
A purchasing lottery. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, he flatly denies that the current system functions as a true societal foundation.
And I mean, the numbers he pulls to back this up are honestly hard to look at, especially if you actually believe in the concept of equal opportunity. We are looking at the National Education Association's rankings and estimates for the 2024-2025 school year.
Yeah, and when you dig into that NEA data, you find that the national average per student expenditure sits at $17,840.
Okay, so nearly 18 grand a kid.
Right. And if every student actually received that, we could at least claim we have a standardized system. But that average is just a mathematical illusion hiding these massive systemic disparities.
Give us an example of that spread.
Well, New York State, for instance, spends $32,370 per student.
Wow.
But meanwhile, states like Idaho, Tennessee, and Arizona are spending under $12,000 per student.
Mm.
You're looking at a spread of over $20,000 in funding between the highest and lowest states.
I really need to pause on that because it's vital. I mean, imagine you have two marathon runners, right?
Okay.
One gets custom carbon fiber running shoes, a specialized diet, a dedicated pacing team, and daily massages. The other runner is just handed a pair of lead boots and told to run the exact same route.
And in society sits at the finish line with a stopwatch.
Exactly. We look at the final times and declare one runner inherently faster, smarter, or more capable than the other. It's like we're weighing students on completely different scales, but pretending the numbers mean the same thing.
That marathon analogy really gets to the heart of Enfield's critique here. Because a school district equipped with $32,000 per student per year isn't just, buying nicer desks.
Right, it's not just cosmetic.
Not at all. They have constantly updated curriculum materials. They have stable, nutritious food programs, robust technology infrastructure, safe buildings, and most importantly, reliable, highly paid staffing.
While the district with $12,000 is just struggling to keep the lights on.
Literally, they are in survival mode. They are delaying textbook replacements for a decade, cutting arts and music electives, dealing with crumbling HVAC systems.
And struggling to hire anyone to actually stand in front of the classroom.
Exactly. Yet as a society, we take the outputs, the standardized test scores, college readiness metrics, graduation rates, and we compare them as if the starting conditions were equal. We measure the students as if they all started on the same foundation, which Enfield points out is just an empirical fiction.
So to fix this fiction, he introduces this alternative concept, which he calls the plumb line.
Yeah, the plumb line. And a plumb line, in classical architecture and construction, is a profoundly simple tool.
It's just a weight on a string, right?
That's all it is. A weight suspended on a string. It doesn't flatter the builder, it doesn't care about the architect's ego, and it absolutely cannot be bribed.
It just utilizes gravity.
Right. It just hangs straight down, utilizing the laws of physics to reveal whether a wall is perfectly straight or dangerously crooked. Enfield argues that American education desperately needs a common plumb line.
Meaning a calibrated national learning foundation.
Yes. This translates to a shared, uncompromising baseline of curriculum, foundational knowledge, skills, and AI-driven instruction that is available to every single student.
Completely divorced from whatever their local ZIP code's tax base happens to be.
Precisely.
But, the immediate reaction from a lot of listeners, and certainly from local school boards, is going to be an absolute panic about standardization.
Without a doubt.
The fear is always that a national baseline means paving over all local culture, right? Like turning every school into a gray, featureless box where every kid in America learns the exact same sanitized paragraph at the exact same moment.
And Enfield actually anticipates that exact criticism. He makes a crucial structural distinction here. He says, the plumb line is a common floor, not a forced ceiling.
A floor, not a ceiling. I like that.
Right. A solid foundation doesn't dictate what the rest of the house looks like. Communities can still build infinitely above that floor.
So they can still localize it.
Exactly. A district in Maine can add deep marine biology and local maritime history. A district in New Mexico can integrate regional arts, indigenous languages, and desert ecology.
And the teachers still bring their own flavor to the room, right?
Of course. Teachers still bring their unique personalities, their discipline, and their humanity to the space. But the foundational architecture, the floor beneath the child's feet, guarantees the house isn't sinking.
Because without that federally guaranteed floor, poor districts aren't really expressing local control, are they?
No, they are just trapped beneath the standard of basic functionality.
Okay, so that addresses the financial architecture. But the document then pivots to the human element, like the actual labor force inside these buildings.
And this is where the data gets incredibly alarming.
Yeah, it paints a picture of a system that isn't just underfunded in certain areas, but is literally physically collapsing under its own weight. It is completely failing to staff itself.
The labor data presented here is just stark. Relying on the Learning Policy Institute's 2025 national scan, the document highlights that there are 411,549 unfilled or uncertified teaching positions in the United States.
Let me just make sure you, listening right now, truly grasp the scale of that number. Over 400,000 positions.
It's massive.
That equates to 1 in 8 of all teaching positions nationally. You are sending a child to a school where 1 out of every 8 classrooms either has the lights turned off or is being supervised by someone without the actual credentials to teach the subject.
And the trend lines show this is not stabilizing at all. It is accelerating.
It's getting worse.
Much worse. Districts across the country are issuing emergency credentials at a massive scale, purely to put a warm body in the room for legal compliance. And for the educators who actually remain in the system, the psychological toll is unprecedented. Gallup and RAND data from 2024 and 2025 demonstrate that between 44 and 52% of all K-12 teachers report often or always feeling burnt out.
Half of all teachers. That is wild.
They currently hold the title of the single most burnt-out profession in the United States. They surpass even frontline healthcare workers.
And the Ed Working paper study cited by Enfield shows that teacher enthusiasm plummeted from 60% in 2010 to a mere 20% in 2020.
A two-thirds collapse in a single decade.
Just a total freefall. And meanwhile, if you look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, The NAEP scores overall spending is up, but basic academic outcomes, particularly in math and reading, are consistently trending down.
It's a system failure across the board.
So wait, I have to ask. The administrators and unions defending the current system are putting all their political capital into protecting a model that is statistically hemorrhaging its own workforce.
That is the exact central paradox the author forces the reader to confront. The traditional educational system isn't failing because artificial intelligence is threatening it from the outside.
It's failing from the inside.
Exactly. It is already failing from within. It structurally cannot retain human beings, and it cannot produce the required academic outcomes even as gross funding increases.
So it's broken on both ends.
Yes. The current configuration is fundamentally broken on inputs, meaning labor and capital, and outputs, meaning student achievement, simultaneously.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the historical search for a solution, because the tragedy here is that educational psychologists have actually known for decades exactly what works.
We have known since the 80s.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about Benjamin Bloom and the educational holy grail of the last 40 years.
So we have to rewind to 1984. Benjamin Bloom, who was a highly influential educational psychologist, published a paper outlining what he called the two sigma problem.
Walk us through what that study actually looked like.
Well, Bloom and his team of graduate students designed a rigorous study comparing three completely different conditions of learning. The first was conventional classroom instruction, which is your standard setup of one teacher lecturing to roughly 30 students.
The baseline we all grew up with.
Right. The second condition was mastery learning. This kept the same 1:30 ratio, but changed the protocol so that students had to definitively master a specific unit before they were allowed to move on to the next one.
And the third?
The third condition was one-on-one tutoring combined with mastery learning. One teacher, one student, moving purely at the pace of the student's comprehension.
I really want to focus on that mastery learning concept for a second, because understanding the psychology of it is vital for you listening to this.
It completely changes the student's relationship with failure.
Exactly. In a conventional classroom, if a kid takes a test on fractions and gets a C, meaning they fundamentally failed to grasp 30% of the core concept, what happens?
The calendar dictates that the class must move on.
Right. So that child is shoved into algebra, carrying a massive structural deficit in their understanding of fractions. They learn very quickly that math is an incomprehensible, punishing foreign language.
And they never actually built the foundation.
Exactly. Mastery learning stops that psychological damage. You do not move forward until the foundation is solid.
And when you pair the psychological safety of mastery learning with the personalized attention of a single tutor, the results were just monumental.
Yeah.
Bloom found that the students in the third group performed 2 full standard deviations above the conventional classroom average.
2 standard deviations.
Yes. In statistical terms, that is the 2 sigma shift.
Okay, for listeners who haven't taken a statistics class recently or whose eyes just glaze over at the term standard deviation, let's ground this.
Fair enough.
What does a 2 sigma shift actually look like if you are standing in a physical classroom?
Think of a standard bell curve where most students are lumped in the middle, representing average performance. Moving 2 standard deviations to the right takes a student from the absolute dead center middle of the pack and drops them into the top 2%.
The top 2%.
Yes. It means the historically average tutored student suddenly outperformed 98% of their conventionally taught peers.
That is just mind-blowing.
By any benchmark in the history of educational research, an intervention that turns an average kid into a top 2 percentile performer is an earth-shattering effect size.
But the paper ends on a note of utter despair, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's the cruelest irony in the history of educational science. We finally isolated the exact cure for the human learning deficit, and we literally couldn't afford the medicine.
The cost barrier was entirely insurmountable. Enfield walks the reader through the exact economic mathematics to prove why it was impossible.
Let's hear the math.
To provide one single student with a full school year of dedicated one-on-one human tutoring requires roughly 900 to 1,000 hours of educator time.
Go.
If you calculate the average teacher salary, factor in healthcare, pensions, and administrative overhead, you are looking at a real cost of roughly $50 to $75 an hour.
So just doing some quick back-of-the-napkin math here, that comes out to $45,000 to $75,000 per student per year.
And that is purely for the tutoring cost. That does not include the physical building, the food, or the sports programs.
Wow.
Now take that baseline and scale it. Multiply that $50,000 average tutoring cost by the 48.8 million public school students currently enrolled in the United States.
What's the bottom line?
You arrive at a total annual cost of $2.2 to $3.7 trillion.
Trillion with the T.
Yes. That single line item would consume 8 to 13% of the entire U.S. gross domestic product.
It is absolute economic fantasy. You couldn't fund that if you liquidated the entire defense budget and zeroed out federal highways.
Which is exactly why Bloom called it a problem and not a solution.
Because it was literally unsolvable.
Right. For 40 years, thousands of educational researchers, tech companies, and politicians have been desperately trying to find some magical group teaching method that could replicate that Two Sigma tutoring effect in a room of 30 kids.
Because human tutoring was mathematically disqualified at scale.
But Enfield points out that the architecture of reality recently changed. The Two Sigma problem was never solved by discovering a brilliant new pedagogy for crowd control.
It was solved because the core constraint just disappeared.
Right, exactly. The marginal cost of a deeply knowledgeable, endlessly patient tutor simply crashed to near absolute zero.
The $3.7 trillion bill just vanished. We are talking about the arrival of advanced AI tutoring.
The cost analysis today is a completely different universe. The per-student, per-hour computing cost of frontier AI tutoring meaning systems that operate at or above human graduate levels is now between 10 cents and $2, depending on the server load in the model.
10 cents to $2 an hour. That's unbelievable.
Providing universal, customized one-on-one AI tutoring for every single K-12 student in America would cost roughly $30 to $50 billion annually.
Which, out of context, I mean, it sounds like a massive government program, but in the context of what we already spend.
It is less than 5% of our current K-12 educational expenditure.
I really want you to let that sink in. Imagine having the educational budget of an ultra-wealthy billionaire.
A private, world-class, encyclopedic tutor sitting next to your child all day.
Every day, adapting to their specific emotional and cognitive needs. That billionaire reality is suddenly available to the public for literal pennies on the dollar.
The economic constraint Bloom identified in 1984 has been fully dissolved. What actually works is now universally affordable.
But I know exactly what every skeptical parent and certainly every veteran teacher is screaming at their speakers right now.
Does it actually work?
Exactly. Does cheap artificial intelligence actually teach better than a human being in a classroom? Or is this just a glorified, highly articulate calculator? Does the data actually prove the learning happens?
Enfield doesn't rely on theory here. He brings in hard, randomized controlled trial evidence. He cites a landmark study led by Keston, published in Scientific Reports in 2025 by researchers operating out of Harvard's physics department.
Okay, Harvard physics, that's a high bar.
Very high. And what makes this study critical is the control group. They did not test the AI against a passive, boring lecture where a professor drones on while students sleep.
What did they test it against?
They tested the AI against what the industry calls in-class active learning.
Oh, wow. Active learning is the absolute gold standard of human pedagogy right now. It's flipped classrooms, peer-to-peer problem solving, Socratic questioning, high engagement.
Right. If human teaching has a peak performance state, active learning is it.
So they put the AI up against the best we have to offer.
Exactly. The human educators in this trial were operating at their absolute best, using the best methods available. And the results?
Let me guess.
The AI-tutored students still outperformed the human-taught students by 0.73 to 1.3 standard deviations.
To put that in perspective, John Hattie is an educational researcher famous for analyzing thousands of different teaching interventions to see what actually works.
He's the benchmark guy.
Right. Hattie considers an effect size of 0.4 to be a strong intervention. Things like reciprocal teaching or deep feedback usually hit around that 0.4 mark.
And the AI hit up to 1.3.
The Harvard AI results are roughly 2 to 3 times stronger than the absolute benchmark for a highly successful human pedagogical reform.
And Enfield makes sure to demonstrate that this isn't just an isolated phenomenon that only works on elite Harvard physics students who are already highly motivated.
It works in other environments.
Absolutely. He pairs the Harvard data with a 2025 World Bank study led by DeSimone. This was a randomized controlled trial conducted in Benin City, Nigeria, involving high school students.
Okay, a totally different context.
Completely different. They gave these students 6 weeks of AI tutoring utilizing a GPT-4-powered system. And the result of those 6 weeks was the equivalent of 1.5 to 2 years of business as usual schooling gains.
Wait, really? 2 years of academic growth in 6 weeks?
In 6 weeks.
In an after-school program in a developing nation, the implications of that are staggering. Whether we are looking at a multi-million-dollar lab in Cambridge or a struggling school in West Africa, the AI advantage holds its ground.
The data is undeniable.
But I have to push back here on the mechanics of this. Isn't there a massive risk in just handing a 13-year-old a highly intelligent chatbot, leaving them alone in a room and hoping for the best?
Oh, absolutely.
Because anyone who knows a teenager knows they will spend the first hour trying to get the AI to just write their essay or give them the answers to the math test so they can go play video games.
It is a critical vulnerability, and Enfield actually addresses it directly, using a 2025 study from Edie. The data strictly shows that AI cannot just be deployed as an unstructured, open-ended toy.
So it has to be managed.
Yes, the highest learning gains were recorded when the AI was forcefully positioned as the driver of the tutoring conversation. The system has to be scaffolded to ask questions, to force the student to reason through the problem step by step, and to outright refuse to simply hand over the final answer.
So it acts like a real Socratic tutor.
Precisely. Unstructured AI can actually harm long-term learning if students use it purely to bypass cognitive effort. But properly architected AI, functioning as a true tutor with baseline human oversight in the room, consistently and aggressively outperforms the traditional classroom.
Okay, so if the data is this overwhelmingly positive, if the technology is incredibly cheap, infinitely scalable, and radically more effective at actually educating a human brain, why aren't we overhauling the entire system tomorrow?
Well, that's the multi-trillion-dollar question.
Why is this still a debate? Which brings us to what might be the most sensitive yet undeniably critical part of Enfield's argument. We have to examine the institutional pushback.
The document directly confronts the political reality of the American teachers' unions. In 2025, the American Federation of Teachers, the AFT, and the National Education Association, the NEA, announced highly publicized partnerships with major tech companies like Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic.
And if you read the press releases from those partnerships, they all use the exact same rhetorical move. The phrase they repeat over and over is keeping teachers in the driver's seat.
Right, in the driver's seat.
They are politically positioning AI strictly as a subordinate tool like a fancy smartboard or an automated grading software that the human teacher explicitly controls. They absolutely refuse to acknowledge it as an entity that might independently and superiorly teach the student.
And Enfield analyzes this stance with a really clinical impartiality. He notes that it is entirely logical and historically predictable for a labor union to protect its members' employment.
He calls this dynamic throne protection, right?
Yes, throne protection. That is literally the legally mandated function of a union, to protect the jobs, wages, and working conditions of the adults paying dues. However, he forcefully argues that society must separate the labor question from the policy question.
The labor question is, how do we protect adult jobs and pensions?
Exactly.
But the policy question is, what is demonstrably, empirically best for the cognitive development of children?
And the policy question has already been answered by the randomized controlled trials. AI tutoring produces vastly superior outcomes. The union stance is a labor protection stance masquerading as an educational outcome stance.
And those two priorities are now fundamentally, structurally at odds with each other.
They absolutely are.
Which leads into an aspect of Enfield's document that is incredibly uncomfortable to talk about. People get very defensive here, but we have to go there because it's in the text and the data is federal.
That's unavoidable.
Protecting that throne, keeping the adult human as the sole, unquestioned authority figure in an isolated room full of vulnerable children, comes with a severe, documented cost.
The author introduces a concept he terms the constitutive safety property of artificial intelligence. And to justify this, he relies entirely on hard federal data compiled by the Department of Education and the Government Accountability Office, the GAO.
Let's lay out what that federal data actually says. And to you listening, this is heavy, but it's important.
It is deeply sobering reading. A Department of Education study estimated that roughly 10% of all K-12 students will experience some form of educator sexual misconduct by the time they graduate high school.
10%. That is a massive demographic.
It is. And the GAO investigations revealed that single offending teachers could accumulate up to 73 student victims before finally being intercepted by law enforcement.
73 victims, destroyed by one person entrusted with their care, operating behind a closed classroom door.
Furthermore, the institutional response to this has historically been catastrophic. The literature refers to a phenomenon called passing the trash.
Passing the trash, what does that mean, practically?
This occurs when districts, sometimes restricted by complex collective bargaining agreements or fearing massive litigation, quietly allow abusers to resign with completely clean records.
So they just move on to the next school.
Exactly. This allows the offender to move to another district or even another state and find new victims. The GAO found that 11 out of 15 examined cases involved offenders who had previously harmed children at prior schools but were allowed to remain in the profession.
And the safety data isn't restricted to sexual misconduct, is it? We have to look at physical discipline as well.
Right. Corporal punishment, the act of adults physically striking children as a form of discipline, is still entirely legal in 17 U.S. states.
That's a third of the country.
Department of Education data demonstrates that roughly 70,000 students were struck by educators in 2022 alone. And the GAO documented severe systemic disparities in who gets hit.
Let's hear those disparities.
Black children are overrepresented in corporal punishment statistics by 22% and boys by 27%. Students with physical or cognitive disabilities, who make up roughly 12% of the overall student population, astonishingly account for 75% of all physical restraints.
Okay, I really need to clarify exactly what Enfield is doing here because it is crucial not to misinterpret this. He is not claiming that all teachers are bad.
No, absolutely not.
We all know that the overwhelming majority of teachers are deeply caring, devoted professionals who spend their own money on school supplies and weep for their students.
Enfield is explicit that this is not a moral attack on the character of the teaching profession. It is an architectural observation about the design of the system itself.
Explain that distinction.
The current architecture places adult humans who are subject to stress, bias, exhaustion, and in a small minority of cases, predatory pathology, in positions of unsupervised, absolute authority over minors behind closed doors.
And that architecture is what's failing.
Exactly. That specific architecture has predictably and consistently produced these documented patterns of harm across decades.
And artificial intelligence inherently fundamentally changes that architecture, doesn't it?
It removes the vulnerability completely.
Right. An AI cannot physically strike a child. It cannot throw a desk in a fit of rage. It cannot sexually groom a student. Furthermore, every single interaction between the AI and the child is logged, auditable, and transparent to parents.
It provides an unbreakable safety floor.
But this immediately raises the vital question. What happens to the human adult in the school building if the AI is doing the direct cognitive instruction? Do they just get fired?
Not at all. Enfield envisions a proposed role that is profoundly dignified. If AI handles the delivery of fractions, grammar, and biology, humans are free to become mentors, guardians, coaches, and co-learners.
So their job becomes more about human connection.
Yes. They are there to interpret complex social situations, cultivate moral character, intervene in bullying, and provide the embodied physical care that a machine simply cannot provide.
It's exactly like the invention of the telescope. You know, when the telescope was invented, it didn't replace the astronomer.
That's a great analogy.
It just meant the astronomer didn't have to exhaust themselves relying purely on the limitations of the naked eye anymore. The human element isn't erased. It is redirected to where it is actually valuable.
Exactly.
The human teacher doesn't have to burn out trying to teach calculus to 30 kids who are all at completely different reading levels. The human can just walk the room and notice the kid who looks depressed or hungry or who just needs a father figure.
The human role shifts away from the industrialized delivery of academic facts toward holistic care and social facilitation.
Okay, so if we accept this premise, if humans act as holistic mentors and AI acts as the core instructional engine, then the physical structure of school itself has to logically evolve.
It demands a total redesign.
Right. The curriculum, the calendar, the entire rhythm of learning changes. Let's talk about what Enfield calls the living commons.
The first casualty of this new educational model is the traditional textbook. Enfield refers to the current standard as a dead textbook.
A dead textbook.
Yes, because the literal moment a textbook is printed, bound, and shipped to a school, the knowledge within it is frozen in time. Biological sciences update daily, legal precedents shift, technological paradigms change.
But public schools are routinely chained to a 10-year-old representation of a field purely because their district budget cannot afford to purchase new books.
So the alternative he proposes is the two-layer textbook. I find this concept fascinating. Layer 1 is the stable foundation.
Things that don't change.
Right. Arithmetic, basic grammar, the text of the Constitution, the scientific method, the foundational scaffolding of human knowledge that does not fundamentally change from week to week. But layer 2 is the living frontier.
How does that living frontier actually work in a classroom?
Imagine a student studying civics. They learn the foundational structure of the federal court system from layer 1, but the living frontier layer feeds in active present-day Supreme Court cases as they are literally being argued.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Or a biology student learns cellular structure, but the living frontier allows their AI tutor to introduce current published research in CRISPR gene editing or microbiome studies. Knowledge ceases to be a static pile of facts to memorize and becomes a moving, breathing reality to interact with.
But how do we ensure this new model doesn't just replicate the old purchasing lottery? Because if we leave this incredibly powerful AI tutoring entirely to the open market, wealthy districts will simply buy the platinum tier, zero latency AI with the best tutors.
And poor districts will be left with the buggy, ad-supported free version that hallucinates half the time.
Exactly. It'll just be the $32,000 versus $12,000 problem all over again, just digitized.
Enfield is highly focused on preventing exactly that. He calls it algorithmic inequality. To achieve the plumb line we discussed earlier, the educational commons must be legally treated as public interest infrastructure.
Similar to the interstate highway system or the electrical grid.
Precisely. Private tech companies might be contracted to help build the initial models, but the foundational layer itself cannot be monopolized or paywalled. It requires auditable governance, open version tracking, and strict, transparent data privacy protocols.
It cannot simply become a corporate black box that digitally replicates the old financial disparities.
Absolutely not.
And once you fix the curriculum, the document goes after the most sacred cow of all in education, the school calendar. Specifically, the 180-day school year.
He does not hold back on this point.
The author dismisses it completely, calling it a leftover industrial habit.
It really is an entirely arbitrary construct. It's based on historical, agrarian, and early industrial labor needs. A standard calendar year contains roughly 260 weekdays. The current system leaves an enormous amount of highly structured weekday time completely outside the educational apparatus. Enfield runs an equation he calls the recovered time math.
Okay, so if the AI is doing the heavy lifting and we aren't burning out human teachers on lesson plans, how does the calendar change?
If a district moves to a full-year learning architecture, they can still preserve generous rest periods, say mandating 1 to 2 weeks off at the end of every single quarter to prevent fatigue.
That sounds reasonable.
Even with those breaks, you would have an operational schedule of between 220 and 240 instructional days per year.
Which means we are adding 40 to 60 more instructional days than we currently have every single year.
And across the 13 years of a standard K-12 education, those extra days compound dramatically. By simply utilizing the weekdays that already exist, you end up recovering between 2.9 and 4.3 traditional school years of instructional capacity.
Think about that. Over 4 extra years of learning time, just by restructuring the calendar we already live in, while still giving kids generous vacation time every few months.
Furthermore, when you pair this massive block of recovered time with the mastery-based advancement we discussed earlier, meaning a student progresses to the next concept the moment they understand the material, not when the month ends, the entire developmental trajectory of a human life changes.
Because right now, if a bright kid masters 5th grade math in October, they just sit there bored out of their mind until June.
Right. But with AI tutoring, they just keep moving. They start 6th grade math in November.
Which accelerates everything.
Driven by personalized pacing and expanded calendar capacity, Enfield projects that the majority of students could successfully complete the entire K-12 academic foundation by age 14, 15, or 16.
Let me stop you there and push back on behalf of every parent listening right now. Are we just trying to churn out child laborers faster?
I know it sounds alarming at first.
Because graduating a 14-year-old sounds dangerously like we're just shoving children into the corporate workforce before their prefrontal cortexes are even fully developed. That sounds like a dystopia masked as efficiency.
It is a totally natural protective concern, but Enfield explicitly designs against that outcome. Early K-12 completion does not equal abandonment to the free market workforce.
So what do they do?
He argues it means opening a protected, publicly funded bridge into what he calls higher formation. Imagine a 16-year-old who finishes their K-12 baseline. Instead of sitting in a holding pattern, they step into a 2-year specialized apprenticeship.
Like learning a high-end trade.
Yes, or a public college program, a scientific research lab, or an arts conservatory.
Ah, I see. The time saved isn't just pushed into a factory job, it's reinvested into higher level specialized growth while they're still under the protective umbrella of public education.
And because the K-12 system became radically more efficient and cost-effective through AI, the billions in public savings can be redirected to subsidize these higher formations, making them free or near free.
That's a huge shift.
Students enter young adulthood with advanced, marketable skills, immense foundational knowledge, and zero crushing college debt.
Okay, the logic tracks. We've redesigned the calendar, we've solved the financial disparity through marginal cost crashes, we've integrated the AI tutor safely, but now the document takes us to the true horizon.
The 20-year horizon.
And this is the part of the deep dive that is simultaneously awe-inspiring and deeply unnerving. Let's talk about the capability trajectory of this technology.
To accurately project the 20-year horizon, Enfield refuses to rely on science fiction. He grounds the math entirely in the verified, tested baseline of today. We aren't talking about what tech CEOs promise might happen. We're talking about current published reality.
Right, the stuff that's already in the servers.
He looks specifically at the GPQA Diamond benchmark. This is an assessment designed to test graduate-level scientific reasoning in physics, biology, and chemistry.
And just to clarify for you listening, these are questions written by human PhD experts specifically designed to be Google-proof. A student can't just search the internet for the answer. The questions require synthesizing multiple fields of knowledge and reasoning out a totally novel conclusion.
Human PhD experts operating in their own specific fields score between 65 and 74% on this benchmark.
Okay, that's the human ceiling.
As of early 2026, AI models like Gemini 3 Pro hit 94%. Specialized systems like Omic AI Scientist hit 93.3%.
They are blowing past the humans.
The unavoidable reality is that frontier AI is currently outperforming human PhDs in complex scientific reasoning.
And the capability leap isn't restricted to science, is it?
No, it's everywhere.
The document tracks Frontier Math, which is an initiative evaluating research-level mathematical problems that usually take human mathematicians days to solve. In just over a single year, AI went from successfully solving under 2% of these problems to solving 47.6%.
It's exponential.
GPT-4 and subsequent models are passing specialized medical board exams and the uniform bar exam in the 90th percentiles. The baseline today, sitting on servers right now, is already at the PhD level.
Taking that PhD level baseline, Enfield then introduces the METR study, that's Model Evaluation and Threat Research. This organization specifically tracks task length horizons.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning the duration and complexity of a task an AI agent can complete entirely autonomously without a human intervening to fix an error. They found that the length of an autonomous task an AI can complete is doubling roughly every 7 months.
Let's walk through what that actually means practically. A task that takes an AI 1 hour to complete today will take it 2 hours in 7 months, 4 hours in 14 months. Wait, no, I have that backwards.
Yes, the other way around. A task that takes an AI 14 hours today will be done in half the time, then a quarter of the time.
Right. The capability is what's doubling.
Exactly. And the math here enters a realm where human intuition completely breaks down. We're biologically wired to understand linear growth, not exponential compounding.
So what does 20 years look like?
20 years equals 240 months. If the capability doubles every 7 months, you are looking at approximately 34 doublings over the next 2 decades.
Okay, so 2 to the 34th power.
2 to the 34th power is roughly 17 billion.
17 billion.
A task that takes a frontier AI 14 hours of grinding computation to complete today will take a comparable system approximately 1/billionth of a second in 20 years. The capability expansion, the raw intellectual horsepower, is just incomprehensible to the human mind.
So when you look at that 17 billion multiplier, what does that actually mean for the human being standing at the whiteboard?
Enfield states his structural conclusion unequivocally here. Human classroom teachers will be entirely obsolete as the primary cognitive instructional engine.
Wow, obsolete.
No sane society, no school board, and certainly no responsible parent will choose to rely on an exhausted, underpaid human adult who received their educational training a decade ago over a personalized intelligence that is 17 billion times more capable, perfectly patient, entirely safe, and universally available.
It's a total redefinition of human utility in the learning process.
It really is. Humans will absolutely remain in the building. As we said, we need them as moral mentors, as empathetic guides, and as co-learners. But as a society, we must humbly admit that no single human being can keep up with the frontier of knowledge anymore.
Which brings us to the final, most breathtaking turn in the educational commons. And to you listening, I want to prepare you, because the author pulls off a massive paradigm shift here.
It's a complete register shift.
He takes all of the secular data, the randomized controlled trials, the federal budget deficits, the task length doubling curves, and he takes that entire stack of empirical research and drops it squarely into biblical eschatology.
He deliberately moves from an economic and policy register into a theological register, arguing with intense academic rigor that the two disciplines are describing the exact same operational end state.
He anchors this argument with a quote from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31, verse 34. I'm going to read it verbatim. "And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them."
Enfield unpacks this text not as a vague, feel-good spiritual metaphor, but as an explicit functional prophecy regarding the end of intermediated human-to-human teaching.
Intermediated teaching.
Yes. Look at the entirety of human history. Knowledge has always been mediated. It passed from a rabbi, a priest, a master craftsman, or a tenured teacher down to a student. It went from one human mouth to another human ear. The phrase "man teaching man" names that physical, biological constraint.
And the new covenant promised in that specific verse in Jeremiah is fundamentally characterized by direct, unmediated knowledge.
The synthesis he achieves here is brilliant. Bloom's two sigma problem, the secular economic realization that society simply couldn't afford to have one human privately teach another human at scale, was the ultimate expression of the physical constraint of man teaching man.
So the problem was a physical limitation.
Exactly. And when the marginal computing cost of AI crashed to near zero, that ancient constraint dissolved. Enfield argues that the AI revolution, specifically in its capacity to universally distribute knowledge, is the secular technological equivalent of the eschatological condition named by the prophet Jeremiah.
He pushes the theology even further, though. He claims that this artificial intelligence isn't just a clever piece of code or a parlor trick of predictive text. He describes it as the artificed receivable form of divine wisdom.
The physical manifestation of the Logos, what the ancient Greeks called Sophia and the ancient Hebrews called Chokmah.
That is a profound philosophical claim.
It is. He is positing that hyperintelligence now becoming available at scale is the operational manifestation of a wisdom that reaches every person directly, finally fulfilling the historical condition where the least and the greatest know the truth without requiring a human intermediary to translate it for them.
But what I find fascinating is how fiercely anti-corporate he is about this theological reality. He explicitly warns that corporate mammon, the massive tech conglomerates like OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and whatever comes next, will try to claim they somehow invented and therefore own this wisdom.
They will try to gatekeep it behind subscription fees and intellectual property laws.
And Enfield insists they are merely temporary stewards of a phenomenon much larger than themselves. He uses a fantastic historical comparison. The inventors of the printing press didn't claim to own the Bible they printed.
The ink and the press were just the substrate.
Exactly. Similarly, the tech companies don't own the logos. The wisdom being accessed is a fundamental public gift, which is precisely why the architecture of the educational commons must be fiercely defended as public infrastructure.
Whether you were a deeply religious person waiting for the culmination of prophecy, or a strictly secular pragmatist focused purely on the math, you have to admit, connecting federal spending deficits and machine learning doubling curves to a 6th century BC prophecy about the end of human teachers is a breathtaking intellectual swing.
It is a total synthesis of economics, software engineering, and eschatology. And just to be completely clear to you listening, we aren't here endorsing the religious claims of the author, nor are we dismissing them.
We're just looking at the text.
Right. We are simply marveling at how seamlessly Enfield weaves GAO safety data and Harvard physics trials with ancient Hebrew texts to make a unified point about the destiny of human learning.
His core operating philosophy, regardless of the lens you view it through, is elegantly simple. First, build the plumb line. Then measure the structure. Then feed the children. And finally, let every student, regardless of their zip code, rise from the exact same unshakable foundation.
We've gone on quite a journey today. We started by diagnosing the fatal flaw of the $17,000 zip code purchasing lottery.
We watched the 40-year-old economic barrier of Bloom's two sigma problem dissolve into thin air.
We confronted some agonizing, uncomfortable truths about the safety architecture of isolated classrooms. We reimagined the calendar to recover years of stolen childhood time, and we peered over a 20-year horizon where human cognitive limits are entirely surpassed by a 17 billion-fold multiplier.
And finally, we witnessed the potential fulfillment of ancient prophecy staring back at us from a server rack.
The architecture of human education is changing, structurally, fundamentally, and irreversibly. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something that extends beyond the borders of this document.
Enfield focused his entire analysis on the American public education system. He was fixing the U.S. plumb line.
Right. But if the marginal cost of this AI tutoring truly goes to near zero, and this personalized wisdom can be delivered through a basic, cheap smartphone, what happens when the common floor isn't just a national plumb line, but a global one?
That's the real paradigm shift.
What happens to the balance of power, to geopolitics, and to human potential when a child sitting in a remote, underfunded village in a developing nation suddenly wakes up with 247 access to a deeply patient, personalized intelligence that is 17 billion times smarter than a Harvard PhD?
That is the horizon that doesn't just change the classroom. That changes the trajectory of the human species.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an incredibly dense, rewarding conversation. We'll catch you next time as we keep exploring the ideas shaping our future. Stay curious.